Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome to this session of the Baltimore Data Week 2020. My name is Andrew Coy, and I'll be moderating this conversation. The topic is the effect of digital equity on learning and working. Please feel free to join the conversation on social media. Baltimore Data Week is the hashtag, and you can tag BNIAJFI, which is the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, Jacob France Institute, that's what that all stands for. As you do, share out on various social media platforms. First, just to start off with a thank you or two. First off, big thanks to Jacob France Institute of the University of Baltimore and the team there, Seema Iyer leading that work and pulling all of us together around such important topics that are going on all week long. She'll chat at the end of this session a little bit about what's coming up after this. But for those that have been joining in with multiple sessions, I'm sure you all have a lot to think about. And as you're working on various aspects, data is so critical to all of those. Also, thank you to Priya Canaboyna, as well as Jared Schuster and Logan Schertz, who are helping support this session in the background. You may not even see them, but they're there, and thank you to them. And a huge thank you to the three panelists they're going to be speaking to us today on this topic: John Horrigan, Sarah Heaton, and Lo Smith. They'll be introducing themselves briefly, and then each one will get a few minutes to talk about their work to frame the conversation, after which we'll have a series of questions and conversations. I want to make you all aware, if you haven't seen it already, the poll results. While you came in, there were a few poll questions up, but you should hopefully be able to see some of the responses there that just give a little bit of sense for who's in the audience and where you all live and work. Also want to call attention to a couple items relating to the Zoom webinar platform. There's the ability to ask question and answers. So if you use the Q&A feature, we'll be able to see those questions and respond to them either verbally in the presentation or via the chat feature. There's also the ability for chat. We may, as we get to the Q&A towards the end, ask for folks that have asked a question in the Q&A to speak to that or to give a little bit more detail, and you may unmute yourself at that point, or we'll unmute you, but we'll talk more about that when we get to it. But the point being, please use the Q&A as a way to make sure that the questions that you have throughout the conversation are being addressed and that we're able to speak to those. So without further ado, if I could have each one of the panelists just give a brief sort of 30 seconds, minute introduction of yourself so that folks know who you are before we then go into each of the presentations. And so if we'll kick it over to you, Sarah, first, and then go John and Lo.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. My name is Sarah Heaton. I work at Baltimore City Public Schools, where I'm the Director of Strategy and Continuous Improvement. And I'm here because I've been supporting the technology distribution efforts in a project management capacity.
And hi, this is John Horrigan. I'm a senior fellow at the Technology Policy Institute. I've done a lot of work over the years at places like the Federal Communications Commission and the Pew Research Center, looking at patterns of people's technology adoption. And today, in a little bit, I'll be talking about what that looks like, not for the nation, but specifically Baltimore City, as a way to look at the size of gaps in internet and tech adoption throughout the city.
Hey everyone, I am Lo Smith. I am the Digital Equity Coordinator at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. If you saw me last year, or if you've engaged with me anywhere else in the city, I started at the Pratt as a technology exchange fellow last year. Luckily, they liked me enough to keep me around. So now I'm working on, rather than some individual projects in the city, I'm overseeing a lot of the digital equity work that we're doing there. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about sort of how I've used all of the amazing resources that we have on Baltimore Data to do my work.
Wonderful, thank you each. And I guess I'll also do 2 seconds on myself. My name is Andrew Coy. I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Harbor Foundation here in Baltimore, Maryland. and I'm excited to be moderating this conversation. I also serve on the Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition as the chair of the Internet Access Working Group, which I'll be speaking to as we go through the conversation. So without more then, let's jump right into, John, if you could please present on your, some of the work that you've been doing and how that ties into this conversation, this question.
Great. Thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to just try to share my screen for a couple of slides that I'd like to show. But what I'm going to talk about is work that I did with the support of the ABLE Foundation, looking at Baltimore's digital divide. The idea was to understand, using data, just what the size of gaps are in Baltimore City. And so what I did was dig into American Community Survey data from the 2018 one-year estimate to really, as I said, dig into the size of Baltimore's digital divide. Let me start first, before I get to numbers and data, with metrics. I've been around long enough so that the digital divide, in my mind, initially 20-some years ago, was simply about the haves and have-nots when it came to computer and internet access. You were on the right side of the digital divide if you had a computer and a dial-up internet connection at home. You were on the wrong side if you didn't. Fast forward to about 10 years ago when I worked at the National Broadband Plan, we focused on whether people had broadband or not. And then broadband was defined pretty simply. It was a wireline broadband connection. For the most part, that meant either cable modem access or DSL access through the telephone company. Lots has changed in the past 10 years. We now have smartphones, we now have wireless networks, we have tablet computers, we all have all sorts of ways to get online and all sorts of devices with which to access the internet. So it was important in considering this work for the ABLE report that I'm going to talk about to focus on metrics. And I chose two metrics to focus upon in measuring the size of gaps in Baltimore City. One was computers, the second was wireline access. Why those two means? Really, it's because having a computer and having a wireline internet connection at home is crucial for carrying out the things online that people expect in our society, and that people have come to become very surprised when people are without them during the pandemic. So research shows that people who have access to the internet, particularly school-age children, if they have access to the internet only with a smartphone, with a data-capped plan, they don't complete homework at the rate that students who have computers at home with wireline access. And today with wireline access, we do mean cable modem service or DSL service. We also include fiber optic service, which is available in some areas in the United States, although not Baltimore City. So the metrics I'll be focusing on today are whether people have access to computers or wireline broadband. Lots of times, however, people say, hold it, smartphones, we love them, they're great. And we do love them, and they are great. And I know that some percentage of people here listening in are looking at their smartphones as they gaze into their screen to watch this session. But smartphones are great for email, text, social media. As I said, they're not so useful for doing homework, for content creation, and other applications like telehealth. So we're going to focus on two main things: computers and wireline access. And for the ABLE report, as I said, I looked into what's going on in Baltimore City, but, and I should say the data for the ABLE report is for Baltimore City. It does not include Baltimore County. But it also compared Baltimore to a selection of 32 other cities, as well as the nation at large. You can see on this slide that in Baltimore, 68% of households have a desktop or laptop computer. 59% have a wireline broadband internet connection at home. And in both cases, Baltimore substantially trails other cities in the United States, as well as the United States at large. You can go into the ABLE report to see exactly which cities we focused on for comparison, but we picked a set of cities that were both sort of tech aspirational, like Seattle, Boston, and San Jose, but we then also chose some cities that are more like Baltimore in terms of demographics and internet access rates, such as Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and other places, Kansas City, Philadelphia.
One
yeah.
quick just note, I think when you maximize your presentation, you hadn't yet shared from Zoom. If you could share your full screen first and then maximize your presentation.
Okay, let me, okay. Give me a second here, sorry folks. I think I'm sharing from Zoom.
Not yet seeing your screen here. I'll let you know as we are.
I believe, okay. That, how we doing?
Yep, there you go. Perfect.
All right, sorry for that oversight, guys. Now we can go to some of the data. So as far as data goes, I did cover some of the numbers in this slide, with Baltimore trailing the nation at large. Let me take a second here on the middle set of bars. You see that 78% of people in households in Baltimore have broadband of any type, 85% nationwide and in the other cities. That gap is mainly smartphones. So if you have a smartphone, you have broadband, but for the purposes of this report, as I said, we really focused on wireline broadband at home, so that close to 20 percentage point gap in Baltimore between broadband of any type and wireline mostly has to do with people having smartphones but not having a wireline connection at home. For the ABLE report, we also wanted to look at households with children under the age of 18. And the reason for that is because there's lots of focus these days on the homework gap, with so much education now happening virtually, and seemingly that's going to persist to some extent, at least for a while. And similar to the overall picture in Baltimore, we see that when you focus just on households with children age 17 or under, Baltimore is substantially behind the United States with wireline broadband at home, somewhat narrower gap for computers. Let's take a gander at gaps by income. And income and affordability for broadband go hand in hand. So when you look at lower income households in Baltimore, they're almost a third as likely as better off households in Baltimore to have a wireline internet connection at home. So you can see that 33 or 34% nearly of households under the annual income threshold of $25,000 per year have a wireline broadband subscription at home, versus 82% or close to 83% for households whose incomes are over $75,000 per year. So low-income households are definitely, by and large, on the wrong side or the other side of the digital divide when you focus on that wireline connection. When we focus on race and ethnicity, you see a similar, if somewhat less pronounced picture. You can see that white Baltimore households have wireline broadband at a significantly higher rate than African Americans and Hispanics. And there are a couple of things working in concert to the disadvantage of minority communities here in Baltimore. One is they, for the most part, have lower incomes on average than other households in Baltimore. But Baltimore also has a history of residential segregation. And when you do the analysis comparing different cities, residential segregation is as powerful a predictor as having a low income in terms of predicting the likelihood of having wireline broadband at home. So the legacy of racial discrimination, residential racial discrimination in Baltimore, hangs over us when we start to think about the digital divide. This slide just tees up the gaps in the city in terms of the number of households without wireline broadband. And you can see 96,000 households are without wireline broadband. As I said, Baltimore trails other cities when it comes to rates of access, and you know, sometimes by substantial margins. And I do a little what if in the final data point in this slide, which is, what if Baltimore were more like Philadelphia or more like Kansas City? Both cities with some similar demographic characteristics as Baltimore. Both cities actually do not, I should say Kansas City is right at the national average when it comes to wireline broadband adoption. Philadelphia is below that. If we were just like Philadelphia, that would mean 16,000 more households in the city of Baltimore would have wireline broadband. 19,000 more households would have wireline broadband if Baltimore were more like Kansas City. So let me just finish up with the recommendations in the report that we talk about for helping to move the dial. In the ABLE report, we say that Baltimore has to do a number of things: improve the develop the pipeline for service and device delivery. We're going to hear a little bit about that more. That's started to happen in a really encouraging way, especially since the pandemic. Work more with community anchors. We'll be able to hear about that from Lo. Widen the set of stakeholders involved. One thing I've heard in other cities, and I'll be curious to see how true this is for Baltimore, is that with the pandemic, more stakeholders from the business community are getting involved in trying to address the digital divide. Let's hope, as I said, that that is true for Baltimore. And finally, improved capacity within city government. We've seen some really encouraging initiatives in Baltimore since the pandemic happened in terms of getting more resources in Baltimore City for computers, particularly for in the school system. But we have to do more, I think, at the city staff level so that the city has a stronger seat at the table in negotiating some efforts to close the digital divide. So with that, I will conclude and turn it back over to Andrew for Sarah to proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those. I do have a number of questions that I'm sure I'll be asking here as we move to that, but we will allow Sarah to go next and present, and then I'll be asking a couple of follow-up questions. But thank you for all of that really valuable sort of research and analysis that you've been doing and presentation of it. Take it away, Sarah.
Great. Let me just share my screen. Okay. And is it okay like this, or do you want me to be in presenter mode, Andrew?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Great. So once again, my name is Sarah Heaton. I work for Baltimore City Public Schools, and since late March have been deployed on the technology emergency response by the school system. I'm happy to go after John because he mentioned things that I wish we had understood better when we did our assessment of student need. So it's a good lesson learned about the kinds of, or the ways that our community understands what internet is and how they sometimes conflate the cell phone with wired internet. And I'll talk about why that was a misstep right now, actually. As I mentioned, I am working on this in sort of a project management capacity. I've been working closely with my colleagues in ITD and in communications, community engagement and enrollment, and the Office of Achievement and Accountability. Our OAA office led an effort to survey our families to understand what the need was in our communities for both internet and computers to engage in distance learning. And our technology survey asked questions like, do you have internet? Not in the way that John may have recommended that we ask that question, do you have wired internet? Also, do you have an internet capable device? And what kinds of devices do you have in your household? So our understanding of community need is still imperfect, but I just want to be clear that I don't think that's a function of a dearth of hard work on the part of city schools staff. families of around 1/2 of our city school students responded to the survey either online or by phone, which I'm not an expert in mass survey techniques, but my understanding is that that's actually quite a good result. So I have a few results that I can share briefly from the survey. I think just to summarize, like 20% of our families are reporting that they need internet access. We think that may be undercounting some families who only have internet access through their cell phone. And then about 1/4 of our families report that they need a computer. And you see that this shakes out, it's relatively consistent, but there are bumps for certain subgroups of students. So for instance, English language learners are more likely to respond that they need internet access. This sets very well with our experience by some of our undocumented families who struggled to sign up for Comcast Internet Essentials. I just thought this was interesting, as it doesn't speak too much to the narrative of how we've been using data to address digital inequity for schooling, but it is interesting to see how like what our families have in place. They have, to John's point, lots of cell phones and tablets and laptops, but fewer desktop computers at their disposal. So part of what we have to do is forecast need more broadly than what we have information available on, which is why we've borrowed from the good work that John shared, which suggests that at least 20,000 of our households with children, so more than 20,000 children, don't have either internet or computers at their home. And we've used that estimate to help ground our assumptions for the purchase of computers and for the completion of various grant applications that we've been submitting to both the federal and the state government all spring. I told SEMA that I wouldn't focus on process, that I would be talking a lot about the data we've been using, but I think it is helpful to contextualize our efforts really quickly. In March, we had this moment of, oh my goodness, this is a very serious public health emergency and is going to have significant effects on schooling, with correspondingly significant implications for how we distribute technology in the system. So then we were left with some questions and also had to deal with some challenges in supply chains regarding ordering of computers. In April, we conducted our first round of distribution and we're just ordering a lot of devices. Our distributions took place at schools. In May, we did the same, a second round of distribution at schools and more ordering. And in June, we launched a centralized distribution process. I'm pleased to also report that we have a multi-pronged internet strategy. We're exploring mesh networks with Andrew. We've had families sign up with Comcast Internet Essentials. And then starting in July, we were able to offer families hotspots for pickup at North Avenue. But there's a lot, so I'm proud of the work that we've done, but there's way, way, way more to do. We use data to structure our device distributions at schools. As I mentioned, we conducted 2 rounds of distribution. We prioritized high school students because they were concerned about credit recovery and an accumulation for them. And then we went to students in grades K to 8. So then within grade bands, to prioritize schools, we looked at their community conditions index. And some of you may be familiar with this already, but this is a composite index that the system has developed with 3 measures: disparity, access to resource, and neighborhood stability and safety. And so we prioritize those schools with relatively lower investment scores for the first round of distribution within grade bands. And while it was only a difference of a few weeks, it was our attempt to approximate where we thought there was a higher likelihood that families wouldn't have computers for use with their children. As we moved into round 2, just as a clarifying point that I make every time I talk about this, we initially said 1 computer per family when supply chains were extremely constrained. Then we shifted to 2 or as many as are needed per child in a family. And the communication on that is still a little unclear. So I'm just plugging that right now, that every child who needs a computer within a family should get one. So I want to share a couple of figures that provide context on our progress and also our work ahead. We've distributed 20,000 computers about, which is roughly 27% of our total population and 31% of our traditional school students. A computer has been provided to 35% of our families who receive SNAP or TANF benefits, about 41% of students who are experiencing homelessness, and 40% of students with disabilities, 30% of our English language learners. So this is trending in a way that we would like to see, where children who we think may have a higher need for device support are getting it, but I think it's not high enough in our opinion. A couple other ways in which we're using data. We've been mapping our device distribution to understand, I mean, really these maps serve as a bit of a gut check for us, like where are there neighborhoods that seem to be not receiving communication about the work that, or about the device distribution efforts, the computer distribution efforts, I should clarify. And we have a dashboard too. So this is an interesting view. This is a view of students who have not responded to a survey, or their parents didn't, and they didn't get a computer. And the circles correspond to the size of the school, the schooling population that meets these 2 filters. And so we're using this kind of view to say, hey, there are some schools that we may need to target our support to as it relates to ascertaining need. A similar view is this, which is children who've said that they need a device, but no device has been assigned. A related view of this is children who didn't say they need a device, but they did receive a device. And you see a lot of children who fit those 2 filters in our Southeast Baltimore communities. Okay, so what are we doing with all this data? We have a couple strategies underway to make use of the data set. We are continuing to do targeted outreach to students in summer programming, those who are experiencing homelessness, and also to those students who were relatively disengaged compared to their peers in Google Classroom in the spring. It will not come as a surprise to you that those students have lower rates of computer distribution. We're also going to do some continued outreach to community partners. Some of you have already heard this because we've been trying to get the word out through vehicles that are likely to be heard by our families. We're going to do an analysis of school distribution patterns to identify what schools and neighborhoods need additional support. And a graph of how we might be thinking through these school supports is included to the right on the slide. We need to do some work on reporting to principals so that principals have a clearer view on which children in their communities have received a district issue computer. And then finally, since ascertaining need continues to be a barrier for us, we're trying to put in place a process through which staff at schools can easily request a computer for a student within our student information system. And so one more process thing, computers and hotspots are available for pickup each Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 6 p.m. at the North Avenue headquarters. So with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Lo.
Okay, cool. I will start getting my screen shared. As always, as we do in these things, we work in digital equity, which does not make us the most talented at some of these tech things. So bear with me for a second or two. All right, I think I've got it, and I need you all to be honest with me if it's not working out. Can we see my presentation? Are we good?
You're good. Yep, Lo, we can see it.
Thank you so much. This is the important non-digital communication that I need when presenting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when you decide to do something that is a little bit digital equity focused, when you come up with this idea, and then of course I'm going to chatter on and on about some of the stuff that I'm doing, but I promise to keep it quick. So where do we start digital equity in Baltimore? One of the coolest things about my job is that I have the title of Digital Equity Coordinator, which means that I get to think about a whole lot of things. And often I try to describe what I do each day by just kind of looking at my calendar, because I do so many different things. So I'm not really going to get into that, but I will get into some of the ways in which I prepare for different projects. So one thing that I know, this is a session on digital equity, but what do we talk about when we talk about digital equity? I'm not sure if all of our community members who are joining us here today have used the term, heard the term, engaged with that before. So I'm just going to kind of go through a couple short things because I think it's important to make this accessible. And actually, the first one is access. So when we're talking about digital equity, we're also talking about access. And so a great example of access is having access to a computer. So I think a lot about the different ways that we as the Enoch Pratt Free Library can engage with this. Right now, we are lending hotspots, we are lending tablets, we are giving people that access. And if anybody really enjoyed some of the stories, this is a common theme in children's literature that I like to use to explain these, which is, there's a theme of when immigrants come to the United States in the 1800s, somebody would give them an orange or a banana, and it would be like a running joke about them not knowing how to eat it. So I think about the access as when someone hands you that orange and you're like, great, I've got an orange. So we've given you the tools that you need. Inclusion, that is making sure that everyone's being engaged in this. It's handing out the orange to every single person. And just making sure that if you maybe have some different needs, whether it is that we need to get you online, but your house it doesn't have the landlines, can we get you a hotspot? What does that look like to make sure that we are able to include everybody? That's why we're making choices like using hotspot enabled tablets and hotspots rather than just trying to push one simple solution for a lot of the digital equity challenges that we have in the city. So that's handing out the oranges. Literacy. This is a big one that I think about on the tech side as well as on the standard literacy side. Right now you're staring at a slide with a couple words on it. It's probably quite easy to read. If I had put up a wall of text, I mean, even just for people who have pretty strong literacy skills, that would become distracting. Technology is very literacy focused. And if we are already encountering rates of lower literacy in some areas, we need to figure out what we can do about that, how to make that accessible, along with the tech literacy skills. And that's all part of digital equity. We can't all have similar experiences online and with tech if we don't all have the same digital literacy. And this is the fun part that I think about, going back to my orange analogy. We've handed out the orange. Everybody's got an orange. How do you eat the orange? If you've never seen an orange before, do you bite into it? Do you peel it? What's the solution? And then community. Some of us have friends that do bite into the orange. We all know that kid from kindergarten. Some of us take the pieces out individually and eat them. Some of us cut it in half and just kind of go for it. So community is about your tech community. I think we all think that we have the right way to eat the orange, but making sure that we are building a technology community is really important in digital equity, because there's not a lot of incentive or motivation to stay engaged with tech if you don't have your community there. I think a lot of us really became tech savvy when we felt like there was a reason to get online and to connect. So building skills, maintaining access, keeping that inclusion, we need community to keep it all going. So those are just some elements of digital equity that I think about a lot, I talk about a lot, and you'll probably hear come up if you've ever seen me do any programming for the library or anything. So like, where do we start, like, physically, if we wanted to start thinking about a digital equity project or solution in the city? One of the things that I get to do for the library is I'm often providing guidance to a lot of our different departments. I love working for the Enoch Pratt Free Library because I have this idea that there is somebody who can do anything at the Pratt. I just have to figure out what department they're in. We have so many people with so many different skills, so many different initiatives going on. I just kind of feel like I'm always a part of this amazing web of work. And so thinking about, where do we start physically if we wanted to start on a project or something digital equity focused? Community-based data gathering is one of my favorite things to say, but what does that mean? It means that we are using some communities like the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, and then we're using other communities like going out and talking to people, chatting with different staff from branches to gather some data around the physical place, maybe the idea that we have, maybe even just like, I don't know, what data can we gather about this thing? And identifying partnerships. And I know that John had talked about this one too. Partnerships are huge. The best thing about Baltimore is that we have so many different people and we're all here to talk to each other. I'm also a member of the Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition. It's a great way for me to be able to connect rather quickly with some great partnership opportunities, other organizations throughout the city. And you've probably seen from a lot of the virtual programming that we are doing at the Pratt, we have a lot of partnerships that go on. We engage with a lot of other organizations. We can't do it alone. Building trust is big in technology. I think that we have to make sure that we are building and maintaining the trust of our communities. And often libraries are some of the most trusted organizations in cities and in America. I think librarian is the #2 most trusted profession. Not to brag, but just to celebrate us. We have a lot of community trust and we want to make sure that we're building that as we're moving forward on any kind of project or idea. One of the things I like to think about is I'm the project coordinator for the Wash and Learn Initiative partnership with Libraries Without Borders. And a lot of the work that we've done in our laundromats has involved a lot of building of trust with our community members, the staff, maybe just even the people that we walk by every day when we walk into that laundromat. It's huge. And then developing unique resources for that project, that place, that neighborhood. I know that often in Baltimore, when we think and talk about neighborhoods, we are very specific about where we live. Even when we were getting started on this call, I was hanging out with everybody on the panel and they asked me what neighborhood I lived in, and I was very specific about which neighborhood I lived in, because the needs of my neighborhood and I was talking about my internet being a little spotty today, and the internet usage in my neighborhood is so different than from maybe 1 or 2 streets over. So these are some of the things like, where do we start when we're thinking about a big digital equity project? And as always, I'm talking about this just as in my individual work, and this isn't representative of all of the work that I do. Those are just some thoughts on some of the stuff that I have done. So now some of the numbers that I bring up for almost every single time that somebody wants to talk about digital equity with me. I rely on the Baltimore and neighborhood indicators to provide some information for me because I need help. And also I want to make sure that I am providing information that is the right information. So determining areas of low connectivity is huge. And thanks to John and the Able Foundation for really kind of drilling down on that, looking at which neighborhoods have low connectivity. Where can we help out? What can we do? Most recently, we've launched the mobile hotspot trucks. So if you've seen that we have retrofitted some of our larger bookmobiles to go out and provide free Wi-Fi, you have to figure out where you're going to park them. So where is it needed? And then population density is a big one when it comes to some of these internet options and stuff like that. So population density, sometimes you can see an area with really low connectivity and then your immediate thought is, okay, so there's low connectivity here, but are there people? And one of the census regions that I like to think about when I think about this one, and often I'll laugh about, is that if you know where Orangeville is, it's got super low connectivity, but it's also got like 12 people living there. It's an industrial region of the city. Yes, it would be great to be able to go and help out those 12 people, but if I drive my Wi-Fi truck in there and park it, I'm serving 12 people versus being able to serve 80, 90, 100, 400 maybe in one region. Sorry, I gotta make sure I can go on to the next slide. And this is the time that I will have, there we go. And then drilling down on it. I always like to continue looking into the different pieces of data that we need. Economic need is always really important. It's something that we're always thinking about. How can we make sure that we are serving communities that need us? And this is one that I think a lot of us always think about, especially in libraries. And then I'm going to pull in a data set that you may not know is out there and one that I really like to think about, which is if we're going to launch a new project, like when we recently boosted the Wi-Fi from our library branches to be able to take up the parking lots and the front steps and even some of the homes nearby. It isn't a lot, but now you can come in, you can get that Wi-Fi, you can sit in your car, connect, do what you need to do for a few minutes. But how are we going to tell people about that? we had to look at the number of persons with library cards per 1,000 residents in that region, which was really fun to look at, because there we can contact those people. We can tell them, hey, we've got a new resource for you. We're going to be boosting the Wi-Fi from your neighborhood library. Can you tell 3 friends? Because even if we only have 250 people, 1/4 of those residents with a library card, if they can tell a friend, if they can tell their neighbor, maybe they can put it on Nextdoor, they can tell somebody in the way that feels organic to them, we can share that communication about whatever new project we have going on. We've been moving really fast during the sort of COVID-19 experience when it comes to providing Wi-Fi, providing devices and hotspots. And so trying to keep up with all of the new stuff that's going on, we've been using all kinds of different communication styles, but a lot of it just relies on how many people are already in communication with the library. So I think about now going to do the thing. So we've looked at data, we've got this idea. Now it's time to engage with community organizers in the conversation. Again, this comes to getting the word out, figuring out if it's the right fit. Maybe if we had this great idea that we want to roll our Wi-Fi truck up to that area, and then it comes down to, oh, well, there's actually not a ton of parking on that block. There are some things data can't tell you. And I really think that there are so many great pieces of information we get from our community organizing friends, because they know if there's going to be a parking spot on that street. They know if this is a great plan for them. They have amazing ideas and opinions. Connecting with complementary organizations is always one of my favorite things to do too, just because if we can connect with other people, we can boost each other's work, and we can make sure that we're sharing all of the great information that we've got. And then determining skills and trainings for staff. This often boots me right back to the data again. One of the things that I've been working on is determining if we're speaking the right language, just when it comes to the right language. Checking in on the data of what languages are being spoken in those neighborhoods, and making sure that we are deploying the right staff who speak those languages, who can engage with people. Recently, we launched a new Facebook group called Pratt en Español, which is a fully Spanish Facebook group for Pratt Library programming, for resources. I'm really excited about it because it means that we are able to connect online in a space that is just for Spanish speakers, because we determined that we had a lot of Spanish speakers who were participating in our online programming, who were joining us online, who would really like something in their language. So we created that. And then the last one is always get out there and do the work. As I said, especially during this COVID experience, we have launched so many different things that I am excited about, and also that were sort of things that had been both in the works over time, and some things that we said, can we do it? How do we do it? Look at the data, talk to the people, let's make it happen. So that's just a brief overview of some of the things that I have done, some of the ways that I have participated in this, the data that I've used. And then if you have any questions about any of those library resources, I have a feeling that Seema has been the person sharing links in the chat, because she does that. But I think that's what I've got to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lo. If we could bring back the other panelists, we'll engage in a couple questions. And there's one that I'll start off with, which maybe either John or Lo would be ideal to speak to. But Sarah, if you have insight and thoughts, please do share as well, which is about digital divide by different age groups, and specifically about older adults. So thinking about the research that has been done around digital divide in older adult populations, what have you seen out there in terms of the information that's available, and options to actually bridge some of that for older adults?
Do you want to go first, Lo?
Yeah, you can go first.
Oh, okay, I'll go first. On the question of digital access by age group, my friends at the Pew Research Center have done some work on that in the past. I'm actually starting a project on that to look at nationally at patterns of tech adoption for older households and older Americans. So the deep drill down data of the sort that I got together for the ABLE report will be available for older Americans in a few months. I know Internet Essentials within the past couple of years has expanded its eligibility to include older households. So those are the two things I would raise, and then pass it to Lo.
One really quick just follow up. When you're doing that research, are you finding that data in the same data sets, that it is broken out by age? Or are there additional data sets that you have to somehow access?
It's the ACS 2018 data. So it is that large survey that the government does, because in typical surveys, you're really not going to have enough respondents in the data set to drill down into age. As it happens for older adults, the adoption patterns for people aged 65 to 74 aren't radically different than people, say, in their 50s. When you get to 75 and older, that's when you start to see some real drop-offs in access. So you want the big data set in order to drill down to those specific age categories, and then to do more stuff like look into differences, not just by age, but age by race, ethnicity, and that sort of thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and then to provide resources specifically to our older adults. Again, this is where I always bring up partnerships. We've been working with Parks and Rec and some of the senior centers to bring, because everyone's still at home, but often we do have people who are trying to get on board with the new digital world. Imagine if you were somebody who always attended Baltimore Day to Day and all of a sudden it's online. We have partnered with our PCTT, so our PC Training Center, that we have at the Pratt, to provide specific classes for older adults. And some of the important things that I see when my colleagues are engaging in that kind of outreach and those classes is that they manage to create accessible language to make sure that they're communicating well. They are utilizing some really specific teaching techniques that have been used for older adults. And I love that they do the research on that to make sure that it's something that's really going to connect. And then also we are seeing older adults who are now participating in our hotspot and tablet lending, which is really great. And then of course, we're reminding them, if you need help, you can give us a call. If you need to come to a class, we're happy to get you on Zoom or Google or whatever it is that you need.
Yeah, and thank you, Tiffany, for asking that question. One additional follow-up from Anne Marie and Sarah, maybe if you could speak to this a little bit, is thinking about parents of students. You know, how are we supporting, or what have you seen out there that's available for parents to support their children, you know, with computers at home and the computers being provided?
That's a great question. So it is not surprising that our first response to, or our way of handling this, has been pretty tactical. We have user guides that are available. There's a one-pager that goes home with the Chromebook. And then there are a series of videos that are available on Baltimore City Schools website for information on navigating Google Classroom and Blackboard and Zoom. But I think in terms of measurement, the school system is trying to think through how you measure engagement of students, and certainly a big driver of engagement in students is sort of knowledge and engagement of parents on digital tools. So we've kicked around a number of other ideas with Tina Hubbard's shop, including like a parent university. I am not the lead on that work, but I know that work is in progress. And I think especially I see this comment from, I don't know, I can't read the whole name, I'm sorry, but Lowe's colleague, but it would be good for us to connect on this point with the Pratt Library of how we could be working together to support parents who are going to be, but let me say that differently, to support families who are going to be helping their children navigate distance learning.
Yeah, no, and that actually prompts one of the other questions that folks have. But you know, first I'll add one other piece to this equation, which is the Digital Equity Coalition. You know, has recently partnered and through support from a variety of different foundations, including the ABLE Foundation and a number of other supports from the broader COVID response, to create a tech hotline that will be you know, housed at United Way and helping folks that are able to call that. So we'll share out some of the information about that as well, as that's getting stood up and is launching this month. So the question though that was asked that I think would be really helpful here is also, how do you evaluate partnerships, right? The work of finding good partners, and sometimes an ecosystem is healthy when there are sort of some redundancies, right? It's not that everything only can be done by one, that's a monoculture. But how do you evaluate when to partner versus when to offer a slight different variation of something that may exist, but in a different way?
So one of the great parts about my job is that I don't have to do all of it. A lot of the work that we do when it comes to partnering is much more expansive than just me. And generally it involves having a big conversation with a number of different portions of the Pratt. Often we do find ourselves working with partners in different departments and organizations. So perhaps there's somebody who's been working with our neighborhood library services, and someone will bring them to me and say, hey, could we do something with this organization? Or there's a program that we've been providing as outreach, and we're thinking, how can we turn this program around into something that we can share with everybody else? So the good part is that I don't have to do all of the evaluating on my own. It's a collaborative effort between a number of programming coordinators, which we do have age level coordinators at the Pratt, as well as I'm doing the digital equity side, which means that we can kind of evaluate if it's right for that age group, that organization. And then we also will then talk to a few other people who handle some of the actual partnership stuff that we do. It is great because I would feel a lot of pressure on evaluating an individual partnership myself. And I think that the best thing about evaluating partnerships is doing that like larger conversation, both internally and externally, is really great to make sure that you're making the best choices.
You want to chime in on that, Sarah, at all, or add any of your thoughts? No pressure, but.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question from my organization. I don't have very robust thinking on evaluating partnerships. The only thing I would say is we are trying to leverage partnerships to get the word out to communities that need support during this time, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, one or two observations that I've made, even just working with you, Sarah, on a couple of things, is focusing on understanding, what the swim lanes are, right? And really trying to ask some of those process questions is something that I've learned from working with you along some of those lines. One other thing that I'll say, Emma, to your question, thank you for asking it, is it's kind of like driving a car. It's really hard to turn a parked car. You got to kind of be moving. So find ways to start moving and in sort of small or lower commitment ways that then you can sort of figure out how to work together or how to work sort of collaboratively but independently. And so I would say, start partnering by partnering. Just don't necessarily set yourself up that it has to be you're going for the moon on it. Do something sort of shorter term as a way. One question that I have for the panelists, and I know we're running up here on time. A lot of the conversation has been focused on the content of the work, but I'm curious a little bit about some of the process. Each one of you have engaged in data collection and or analysis, which is what a lot of folks that are coming to this call, I'm sure, also spend plenty of time thinking about. What was something that surprised you either about data collection or about data analysis as you've been working on this specific question right now, digital equity in Baltimore?
I can start if you don't mind. I'm going to start with a quick plug to seniors programs for digital literacy because it's my father-in-law's 96th birthday today, and he does go to the library in Baltimore for his tech support, or did before the pandemic. But to your question about data, a thing in terms of analyzing the data, and I talked about it at the top, is settling on metrics. I can tell you at the national level, there's a temptation to engage in some digital happy talk on, 85% of Americans have broadband, digital divide is taking care of itself. Well, the metric I focus on is not that overall broadband number, which includes smartphones, which has its limits for carrying out tasks, but on the wireline number. And I'm pleasantly surprised that more and more it seems that people accept that focusing on the wireline metric is the appropriate one. I wonder a little bit whether that will persist as the pandemic might fade a little bit, but it's interesting to see that there is some focus on the wireline number that's a little different than it was a few months ago, which means we have larger gaps than a lot of people like to think about.
I can go next. I think that one of the surprising things that happened for us was seeing there's a subset of children whose parents indicated that they require a computer. We provided that information to principals who then conducted outreach to families to come to schools to pick up computers. We did that twice. We now have the centralized version of this, and we've been pinging those families to come get computers. It may be possible that they are getting them, but I don't think that enough of those families have picked up a computer for their family, and it indicates for us that there are either other barriers, be it our communication isn't working, it's hard to get to schools, there's not trust of the school system. I don't know, but I think we need to interrogate that a bit. The other point, it's not what you asked, Andrew, but it's just an aspirational comment I'd like to make related to this. You know, in some ways, getting computers to kids is the easiest thing to measure about distance learning, because then there's a whole nother set of drivers that influence whether or not children engage in distance learning, and then another set of drivers that lead us to whether or not a child is learning in a distance learning environment, and all of that work needs to be thought through. So given that it is a bit easier to measure whether or not you've gotten a computer to a child, one thing that I think I'm speaking as Sarah, not as Baltimore City Schools, I think it would be really excellent if our system could get disciplined about trying new ways to get computers to kids and then seeing what the result is, and then seeing what bears out, then trying something else. Like if we could get sort of disciplined about a cycle of like a PDSA cycle related to computer and hotspot distribution, I would be really pleased about that as an advancement in how in our data practices.
Wonderful. Go for it, Lo.
And so mine is actually in libraries. I am a firm believer in anecdotal data, and the thing that has really surprised me sort of during our digital equity work that we've been doing during COVID, and everything we've been doing, has been the faith and excitement in our communities. In my digital equity work, I am one of those people who I have access to a lot of our sort of like back-end communications, and just seeing the messages that we're getting from people thanking us for just the basic stuff that we are providing, virtual programming, their faith in us to be able to create virtual programming that they want to participate in, and then the constant sort of feedback that we're getting from our community, if we're doing it well, how we could do it better, has been amazing. It's been so interesting to see how many people are reaching out to us throughout this experience and just providing information, feedback, or just, there's somebody who sent us a Facebook message that just said, Enoch, Pratt, Free Library, I love you. So just stuff like that has been really interesting and really unexpected to pop up in all of the things that I'm doing.
Well, I think that's an excellent note to end on here, and for me to express thanks to all of you, to the three of you panelists, as well as to the team from University of Baltimore Jacob Francis Institute, led by Seema Iyer. I don't know if you want to say a few things about the upcoming session, as I know you all are back to back today with a bunch of stuff. So, but thank you to each of the panelists, and thank you to all the attendees. And with that, I'll turn it over to Seema.
Thanks so much to all of you, and Andrew, excellent job as expected as moderator. Thanks to this is our 13th out of 20 sessions celebrating our 20th anniversary This is awesome. Thanks so much for participating. The next session is actually something that we learned about through the Digital Equity Coalition on this amazing open data set on speed tests going on around the country. And and believe it or not, data scientist lives in Highlandtown in Baltimore. So once we figured that out, we're like, we're going to use you for Baltimore Data Week. And he luckily agreed to do that. And that starts at 3 o'clock, not too long from now. So if you want to learn about this amazing open data set right here in Baltimore, that's a national resource, join us at 3 o'clock. And I hope everybody has an amazing Baltimore Data Week. Thanks so much.